Hey, good afternoon. This is Dr. Camden, and I'm here for an Instagram Live on Deconstruction Journeys with Tim from the New Evangelicals. So I'm just going to look for Tim and get him on here. All right, inviting him on. Hey,
Hey, friend, how are you?
good. How are you doing?
Good. I just remember that I never gave you a bio like you wanted. Sorry.
That's okay. I thought it was funny when you said you don't have a bio because you do so much. I thought you just had one on hand. So.
I have so much. I do so much that I don't write my own bio.
Well, I'll give you a chance to tell everyone about yourself then. But how are you doing? We haven't talked since we both became parents of two.
I know. Are you sleeping? Because we're trying to sleep over here.
Yeah. How old is your little one?
3 months now.
Okay.
3 months.
Mine just turned 5 months.
Okay, yeah. So we are. It's a big adjustment, especially for Sarah, my wife. You know, she has two kids now who want her all the time. But we are surviving. I mean, it is great. Obviously, having another child is amazing, no doubt about that. But it's definitely an adjustment. But we're making do.
Good. How is your older one doing with the transition?
He's good. Yeah. He loves Harper. That's the little one, and
Oh,
almost too much. Always trying to kiss him, trying to sit on top of him to hug him. So it's a lot of that kind of stuff. But he's doing overall really well.
good. So do you have
Yeah.
two boys or is it boy and girl?
Two boys.
Oh, two boys. Okay.
Yeah.
I have
Yeah.
girl and boy now. So.
Okay. So how are you doing with that? Are you surviving?
We are, yeah. We had a little trouble with the 4 month sleep regression, so that might be what you're feeling in
Yeah.
that 3 to 4 month range. But it's starting
Great.
to get better, so I'm glad about that, especially having gone back to work and just doing all the
I don't
things.
know how you do all that you do between. I think you said that you read 50 books last year. Plus you have your practice. Plus you do this. Plus you have two kids. My
I
hat's
don't
off to you.
know either. I really don't. Other than I have a supportive, equal partner as my husband, so he makes it possible, really, for me to
Yeah,
do
for
what I do.
sure.
So yeah.
Great.
Well, thank you for joining me for this series. This is the last of my Instagram lives on deconstruction journeys.
Oh,
And
cool.
when I first thought about doing this series, you were one of the first people I thought about because I wanted to hear your story of what happened with your church last spring. You and
Oh.
I had talked a little bit about it, like in the DMs, just one on one. And then since then, my family left our church that we were members of last summer, which was an
Mm,
evangelical church,
yeah.
and just kind of searching for where we fit. And so, so I wanted to bring a variety of people on and see what have their journeys of deconstruction and or reconstruction looked like, and then how's church fit in with all of that.
Mm.
Yeah, so tell everybody, since we don't have your bio, tell us about yourself. Where do you live? What do you do? You just mentioned your family a little bit, but anything
Yeah.
about your personal life you want to share?
Sure. I live in New Jersey with my family. We live by Philadelphia on the other side of the Delaware River. I do this work full time and also play music as well. So those are my two professions right now. And my days are pretty busy, either answering DMs, making content, trying to help out with the kids, or going to a gig. I had a gig last night. I got home at 2 o'clock in the morning, and here we are. So yeah,
Mhm.
so that's kind of my life, and I love it. I've been a committed Jesus person my entire life, and I still am. What led me to start this account that now has become this nonprofit that we've created was because out of my devotion and desire to want to follow Jesus. So I'm still committed to that movement.
Yeah. When did you start the account?
December of 2020, a year and a half ago.
Oh, okay. Because it has
Yeah.
just grown. It's just so huge. Like when I was on your podcast when we first met, I'm not even sure when that was, probably winter 2021. So
Yeah.
probably just a couple months in. I remember it was maybe 7,000 members. It was under the 10,000 mark still, but it was growing significantly. And now it's what,
Yeah.
37,000 or?
We just hit 40,000
Oh, okay.
yesterday.
Wow.
And I know you know this, but for people out there definitely is always a temptation to want to like track your impact by your numbers.
Mhm.
But we try and measure impact by engagement, like with actual people. So what I would say is that, it's our DMs and it's our Facebook community that really matters to us. So we have 5,000 people in our Facebook community and we answer about 200 DMs a day. I mean, most of my day is in my DMs. And I make that a point because my background was mega everything, right? Like the more numbers must mean success. And while having 40,000 followers is certainly cool, and it has helped us get some other opportunities to be featured in some more, larger areas. The key is really the engagement and how are we helping people. So that's what's important. But yes, our account numerically has grown. And also, a quick side note, TikTok, which I would never do, someone convinced me to do it. We have more followers and better video engagement on there than on Instagram, only like 4 months into it. So it's very interesting. Yeah, one of our videos hit over 1 million views, and we have like 66,000 followers on TikTok. So TikTok is a very different animal, but it's been weird to be on there and be on TikTok because I'm 33. I'm like, who's on TikTok besides like 15-year-olds? But here I am, and apparently a lot of people who are deconstructing are also there. So
yeah. It's been recommended to me to go on TikTok, and yeah, I'm 35, and I'm just like, I don't know that they want to follow me. And
no,
also,
they will do it. They will follow.
I have a lot of young adult clients in my therapy practice, and they're like, I think I have this disorder because I saw it on TikTok. And I'm like, no, that person does not know what they're talking about on TikTok. And so I guess that's kind of given me like a bad view of TikTok, but apparently there's a lot of good stuff going on there too. So.
Well, just one piece of food for thought. A great thing that you could do is you can find those videos and then respond to them on TikTok and be like, actually, this is not a healthy metric, So there's people who do that kind of stuff. But yes, my wife also had moments where she's like, hey, I saw on TikTok this thing about a 1-year-old and Tim is showing it. So maybe he has a mental issue. It's like, Sarah, it's TikTok. Like, let's see what the doctor says so we can go from there. But certainly, yes, it could be influential.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think it's cool that you look more at engagement and are you helping people than the numbers, although that does open doors. But you have a very engaged community, lots of stories every day, lots of DMs, as you're saying, lots of engagement on the Facebook group, which I also joined. Yeah. So what's your goal and your mission been with the New Evangelicals?
So our mission statement is that we're centered on Jesus and that we exist primarily to help and be a part of advocating and holding space for the people who've been marginalized by the American Evangelical Church. That's really what it comes down to. That's our primary focus. So we do that in 3 ways. We have like 3 pillars. And the best way to explain this is kind of we use a house analogy. So a lot of people like myself grew up in the basement of the Christian tradition called evangelical fundamentalism. We were taught that this is all there is. And if you walk up these steps and out that door, there's no oxygen up there. There's no Christianity up there. You're leaving the faith. And then a lot of us ended up walking up those stairs and out that door for a variety of reasons and found that, oh my God, I'm still in this house. So we try and be that first room in that house. So we try and hold space for people in that room. So people who are just like, what do I think about hell now or the Bible? So we try and say, listen, you can breathe. Okay, you're still here. You're still safe. Even though it's a big step to come out of that basement. And then we do 2 other things. So number 1 is we hold space. Number 2 is that we offer people to have little tours throughout the house of the Christian tradition. We say, listen, this house is way bigger than what any of us knew. And there are people who have built other rooms in this tradition that we should probably explore. Now, I'm not the person to tell you what they are, but we can connect you to people who can explain to you why they live in this room. So that's like, maybe it's Black theology, Black liberation theology. Maybe it's process theology with Trip Fuller. Maybe it's more mainline Protestant theology, like Episcopalian, whatever it would be. So we do that. And then the last thing we do is that we advocate for our community by kind of, the crude way of putting it is kind of clapping back to the people in the basement who are like, you're a bunch of heretics, come back. And we're like, actually, no, you can't say that anymore. Like your power is no good here, kind of thing. So we do a lot of responses to either theology or now we're really tracking Christian nationalism as it's really growing. And we're just doing our best to advocate for all of our neighbors, including the marginalized voices, by doing videos and just exposing some of the real corruption and rot in the basement that refuses to be acknowledged by other people in evangelicalism.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. I like the house and the visual of coming up and exploring all the other rooms. And one of the things I think you've done so successfully is clapping back, as you say, but in such a kind way that invites a conversation rather than demeaning people. It's easy to demean the other side, to use dehumanizing language because of the hurt that we've experienced from the other side. But I like how you're like, Allie, I'd love to have a conversation, or just you're inviting it and they don't take you up on it. It seems most of the time, but yeah, you do it in such a empathetic way, I think. Yeah. So, okay. So tell us a little bit more about your faith background, Tim. So you said you've been a Christ follower. You're still a Jesus follower. I love that that's a part of your mission of the New Evangelicals too. So what's your experience of church been like growing up, and how's your faith kind of evolved over time?
Yeah, I grew up in a pretty evangelical fundamentalist upbringing. My parents got saved later in life and just found this church and thought, okay, we're Christians now. This is what it means to be a Christian. So I was homeschooled until ninth grade. I grew up in a hymns-only church. I was 11 years old when they wanted to try and get more modern music in there, so they threw me on the drums. And so I started playing drums early on. But yeah, I mean, as far as the evangelical checklist, I've accomplished all of them, right? I'm like how Paul says in the Bible, he was the Jew among Jews. That's how I kind of see myself. And there's many of us who have these credentials, but you name it, I've done it when it comes to being involved in church life or even parachurch ministries. I was involved in an organization called Child Evangelism Fellowship that does these good news clubs. So that's a huge part of my life when I was a teenager. I just say all that because I was always involved and committed in evangelical culture my whole life, whether it was through music, it was being in youth group, leading youth group, doing Awana, VBS, parachurch organizations, helping to plant churches when I got older, leading worship when I got older, mission trips, like I've done it all. So that was my whole world. Was that entire culture, and also the very vastness of it, right? It's not really a monolith. It's very interconnected and networked. It's almost like a spaghetti bowl. So you just kind of discover all kinds of things as you're in that culture. So that was my faith life. Honestly, it was complete, commitment to Jesus. That's what it was. So that hasn't changed. But yeah, that's how I grew up.
Okay. And take us to more like recently, what started your faith deconstruction? When did that start? And was there any like particular event that prompted it or started it? And how
Well, I didn't even know that was a term. Like when I started this account, I didn't know that deconstruction was a word we were using, right?
Okay.
So long story short, because there's obviously a lot here, when I was 18, I became part of this community group that was run by other young adults. It wasn't a church thing. It was kind of like our own thing. And it really became a very vital part of my life because we were all very committed to Jesus, but also starting to rethink just the idea of church at the time. Like, what is church, right? And we were thinking, well, is it like this event? Is it a community? And because we were all involved in this like small group type format, we were able to try new things whenever we wanted because we all ran it together. And that was really influential in helping me just think about like Christianity a little bit different and just think about, well, what actually is the gospel, and like, what is this and what is that? So I've always had that kind of questioning mentality about me. Things really shifted. Or I should say something broke in my mind in 2016 with Trump. That was, and this is a very common story. It was this moment when I thought to myself, and I didn't have language for it then, but what it was me saying, I assumed that by having the same beliefs, we would have the same values. But it turns out that my values are different than the people that I share a lot of the same beliefs with. And, when Trump came on the scene and those leaked Hollywood access tapes came out, right, of him literally admitting a sexual assault in very crass ways, I thought to myself, like, oh, there's actually a silver lining here. Like, evangelicals are not going to tolerate this. Like, I'm not that old, but I remember faintly when Bill Clinton, right, had the affair in the White House and the outrage, the moral outrage from evangelicals about how disgusting it was, how he wasn't fit to be a leader. So I just kind of assumed, like, oh, this is actually a slam dunk because evangelicals are going to reject Trump now. They have to, clearly, because he's on a hot mic admitting that he's grabbing women. And they don't stand for sexual impropriety at all. That's a huge core value of evangelicalism. Great. And then Jerry Falwell says, no. We need a commander-in-chief, not a pastor-in-chief. And evangelicals go, yeah, you're right. Yeah, no, it's just locker room talk. And that's when I went, like, jaw dropped, because people that raised me as a child in my fundamentalist upbringing, who were, I would argue, good people doing their best with what they had, taught me that sex is sacred, right? That you're married for life, that you don't look at pornography, etc. And now they're telling me on Facebook that they're supporting the guy on the cover of Playboy on his third marriage and who's admitting sexual assault. And that was a moment where I went, I don't know what is wrong, but something does not smell right here. And then, of course, the whole 2016 through 2020, just the re-entrenchment of Trumpism and evangelicalism, right? This whole insane devotion to Trump and just the defense of so many things that he said that are so clearly either not true or racist or homophobic or xenophobic. I mean, we know this. I'm not gonna go through all of them. There is a dictionary-sized book of these things. And then when the murder of George Floyd happened and the lynching of Ahmaud Arbery happened and the murder of Breonna Taylor happened, and I'm watching pastors that I knew retweeting Candace Owens' talking points, I'm like, what the hell? Like, what is happening? And that was for me a moment where I said, I don't have language for what I feel is wrong in the country when it comes to race, but I'm missing something here. Like, clearly something is wrong. I don't know what it is. I know nothing about decolonization, not a word in my vocabulary. You know, Black liberation theology, never heard of it at the time, but something is not right. And then the final straw, for sure, was definitely COVID. You know, just watching how evangelicals and responded to COVID. And that's actually why I launched New Evangelicals, because of Sean Foyt. Sean Foyt is the person to thank for New Evangelicals, because I saw him in 2020. He was doing these maskless protests, right? These hands off our faces kind of thing, and we're going to worship in the middle of a pandemic and get people sick, and it's a whole cluster. And I said, I'm watching this video in like October of 2020. I'm watching Sean. I'm watching people like celebrate this. I'm going, this is crazy. We need a new evangelical movement, because our evangelical movement is so corrupt. It's so messed up. We need to be new evangelicals. That's how I thought of the name. And then I grabbed it, and now here we are. So that's kind of it's a little long-winded, but those are the three big ingredients that kind of got me to rethink my theology, why things are the way that they are, what do I believe about hell, about racism, about how can evangelicals support someone like Trump and call themselves Christians? Like, what am I missing here? That's what kind of led me into this world that we now call deconstruction or renegotiating our faith, etc.
Yeah, when I polled my audience of what was the catalyst for your deconstruction, those were a lot of the same things people mentioned. Purity culture was definitely mentioned, since that's my area of expertise. But like racism was mentioned, the church's response to COVID, and then Trump and all that goes along with that was definitely mentioned. So the last, I guess it's been 6 years now, have just been one thing after another that have led all of us to this place.
Right.
Do you think, I imagine that most of the people that follow your account no longer identify as evangelical. Do you think you'll ever change the name, or do you think that name still fits and still it makes a strong point that what are your feelings about that?
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. I thought about that before, like we would change our name. I don't think we would, because the early evangelical tradition, I'm thinking about the early Wesleyans here, were quite on point with some of this stuff. I mean, they were abolitionists. They were the first. Oberlin College was the first college to ordain women. There's a book called Discovering an Evangelical Heritage by Donald Dayton. It's a great book for anyone to read. It's 120 pages. And it's just like face slap after face slap of early evangelicals who were like on the cutting edge of pushing society forward in the name of Jesus. Like, there's even a story of a couple who got married, and the woman was like, I'm not taking your name. I'm not your property. I'm doing whatever I want. Like, sign this agreement. And you're like, hell yeah. So certainly there is, in my view, an evangelical tradition to reclaim. And that's why I called it the New Evangelicals. But I also understand how that term is so loaded, and it makes people nauseous, and for good reason. Like, I totally get why. I get why people would not want to identify as an evangelical. I don't want to identify as an evangelical. That's why I identify as a new evangelical. I get it. But I'm also kind of too stubborn to let fundamentalism and Christian nationalism hijack the term and make it a monolith of like, this is what it is. When even today, even before us, there are good evangelical groups who are quite progressive in their outlook on making society better, that have always been there. Like there's a group of evangelicals for climate justice that exists. They're out there, but they're just so overshadowed by this conservative evangelicalism that has done a great job with really the propaganda of we have the gospel, we're being biblical, and no one else is. So listen, I would say never, but I think when people see the new evangelicals, it makes them like at least interested. Like, well, what is this? And so in that sense, I kind of like keeping it. It's kind of it's a little jab to the evangelicals out there. Like, you don't own this term. You're not allowed to say it's just yours. It can also be ours too. We can still be faithful to Jesus in the process.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it makes a powerful statement, and it definitely probably gets people to take a second look, because at first they're like, what is this? And
Right.
but it makes a powerful statement that evangelicalism doesn't have to look one way. And you can still be a faithful follower of Jesus and not vote Republican, which is what I was taught growing up. You had to vote Republican.
And it's crazy to think that, and listen, that's a very real reality. But I guess what I would say is that it hasn't always been that way. So it can also go back to not always being that way, right? And certainly I'm not here to say that our name or our organization is going to be the one to change all of that. But if we can be one little, piece of pushing people out of that fundamentalist evangelical like combination that happened in like the 20th century, then job well done on our part. If we can play a small part in that, I'd be happy.
Yeah. Well, tell us then about your experience with church. If you, as much as you want to share about what happened last spring, summer for you, and where you and your family are right now in regards to your relationship with church.
Yeah, sure. So I just want to say that I did a whole podcast episode on this for the whole story. It's episode 11 on our podcast where you can hear what happened. But the long and short of it is that I was really involved at an evangelical church that I loved for 6 years, playing music. They were not a mega church, but they were very mega church minded in the sense of like production and being professional. And I love that. As a musician who's also a professional musician, it's like a match made in heaven. So I was all in as a volunteer, never was paid by them, served every Sunday or most Sundays, helped build the worship side of things. We got real technical with things like Ableton and our production. It was honestly great. Donated a drum set to them. I also helped kind of cultivate this multi-church worship night that we started that kind of blew up in our area to 600 people from 60 different churches attending. And on the stage would be people from all different churches playing together. It was actually very powerful. And we got well known in our circles for doing that. We were networking with other churches. It was really beautiful for me. I'm a big networker, and I believe in unity of the church. So I was all in. I mean, I was totally all in doing this work. We didn't see eye to eye on everything, but I never brought this stuff up at church or in like our devotional group time, Long story short, started New Evangelicals in December of 2020. And then in April of 2021, my senior pastor sat me down, for lunch and just said, we love you, but we ultimately, through a long conversation, I can't have someone on the stage saying things on social media that I would not agree with, essentially. And so you either have to stop serving on the worship team or you have to stop doing the work you're doing online. It was pretty much where we got to. So I had to resign from being a part of the worship team. They said I could still stay at the church, but we all know that's a death sentence. Like that's not sustainable long term. How do you just start attending somewhere and then being asked every day, why aren't you serving anymore? And trying to have that conversation without dishonoring your pastor. I mean, it's an unrealistic like metric to hit. So I ended up leaving the church, and within a couple of weeks, most of those relationships completely dissolved. So it was very painful. One of the most difficult times of my life on a relational level, especially being a type 6 on the Enneagram. That means I'm a loyalist, so I take relationships very seriously. Yeah,
I am too.
Yeah, so I'm a loyalist, as you know, and you take those seriously. And it was really a wake-up call that like the church I thought that was safe, meaning we could hold different perspectives on things and still center around Jesus, actually valued the belief over our relationship. And I just don't function that way. To me, relationship is always over belief. I have friends who don't believe a lot of things that I don't believe, and we are close, intimately close friends. So that was really a gut punch, and there was some other stuff that kind of went down. It wasn't handled well. My worship pastor wasn't a part of the meetings, and I found out later that I was also resigning from that worship night that I was a part of as well. It was very painful. So that's what happened there. It was an incredible blow. It put me back in therapy, and a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of anger, frankly. I mean, a lot of anger. I just felt totally wronged in the situation. And I'm someone who tends to re-examine things like that, like almost ruminates on them, right? Like, what could I have done that would have caused this? And like after therapy and working through it and thinking about it, I can confidently say I did nothing wrong. Like, I wasn't doing anything that broke any of the rules or moral failing. It was just having different theological perspectives on queer inclusion, or other things, tone of voice maybe, of how I communicated things that caused it to happen. So that's what happened.
Yeah. Well, where has that led you and your family now? Have you been taking like a step away from church, or have you looked for other churches, or how do you and your wife feel?
Yeah, my wife is not like me. She's much more agnostic at this point. She grew up a PK, and obviously also being in the middle of motherhood, she's like, I have just no time to think about this, Tim. Like, I'm focused on our kids and just like surviving day to day and trying to find
Mm-hmm.
sleep. No problem. We are not back into church. I don't anticipate us going back anytime soon. I've been committed to the Sunday morning events for 30 years of my life, every Sunday up at 6 o'clock in the morning. So I am taking the Sundays back, right? And their family times. I have gigs now at night. I play like in casinos and bars and clubs. So I get home like 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock. So that's my sleep. And honestly, I've reflected on this a lot. I my morals have not degraded from not being part of the Sunday morning service, right? Which you kind of are taught, like, if you forsake the assembly, like, God knows where you're going to end up,
Mm-hmm.
That has not happened. I do not miss the Sunday morning event in the sense of the sermon, all the process. I miss the people, and I miss feeling connected to something bigger than myself. I miss those two things big time. But would I trade those to go back to like a non-affirming white evangelical space? Hell no. Like, I could never go back there. So my future institutional church life would look much more either mainline Protestant or progressive evangelical, but that's not something that I'm really thinking about right now. I really made new evangelicals my community. This is kind of like how I find my connectedness to people, even though it's more digital. But that's just what I do.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. That it's not a top priority to return to church at this time, and that you find your community and sense of connectedness in other ways. I think the sense of community is what I miss the most about church for me.
Oh, for sure. And we hear this, every day we get DMs. I am so lonely. And I go, me too. We have a map on our website where people can sign up and see who's in their area. So we're trying to find ways to connect people. But the loss of community, or at least the feeling of what you thought was community, is it's a very bitter pill to swallow. I get why people still stay. I stayed till they told me to leave.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think last thing I would say about this is that, not to make it a self-centered thing, but there was really there was no growth happening being in church. Like, I wasn't growing spiritually. I get my theology from podcasts, from people who are way more qualified than my previous senior pastor to teach the Bible, right? Like, there's the Bible Project, there's Bible for Normal People, there's Trip Fuller, there's so many people I can go through. I'm just like, yes, this is me growing. So going back to a church, like, it wouldn't be for any kind of growth in that sense. It would just be really trying to find people that are like-minded to be centered with, to hopefully do something on Sunday morning, or hopefully make new friends. But right now, that's just not a scratch that I need to, or an itch that I need to scratch at this time.
Yeah, I get that. And
Yeah.
we left our evangelical church last summer because, well, the response to COVID was not what we would have liked, but mainly it was because it was complementarian, and I just couldn't handle that anymore. I knew what I was getting into when we started going to that church, and I knew that there was that discord between my beliefs and the way that me and my husband live, in our marriage and in our world, and then the way that the church believed. But we still attended for several years, and then I just couldn't take it any longer. And so we left, and then we had our baby this February, and it's just the stark difference between, like, our first baby. We had several baby showers, we had like dozens of people sign up to bring us meals, which was so kind. And this time we had like one friend bring us a meal, and then my work brought a meal. And it's just so disappointing to see those relationships, because we don't go to the same church. Those relationships have disappeared, really.
How did you feel about that? That has to be gut-wrenching, honestly.
Yeah, it was hurtful, because we lost a lot of other relationships through the past year or so, and been through a lot of other transitions. And so, yeah, it was hurtful. And some of it is second baby. You might have experienced that too. You know, people just don't get as excited for a second baby. So that's fine. And I certainly wouldn't go back to a church for meals, you know, after having a baby or anything. But it was just, yeah, that loyalty is so important to me too. Like knowing that you're 6, I'm like, oh, we know this then. Like, so people not showing up or not even like checking on us or anything just hurt.
That makes me angry for you. Like I know how it is, frankly, it's a very shitty feeling. And there's a lot of anger tied in that, of just like, what the hell, you know, like we shared all this life together. And then all of a sudden for you, it's just gone. Like what, then that makes you think like, well, what did we really have in the beginning anyway? Right? Like if I have another baby and I don't hear from you, not even a congratulations, and we're cool, like there was no big falling out. What kind of friendship did we have in the beginning anyway? Because I would automatically congratulate you on having a second child, right? So anyway, I'm angry for you. That's just so terrible. I'm so sorry.
Well, I think a lot of it is just out of sight, out of mind. Like everybody's just focused on their day-to-day life and who's right there in front of them. And that one friend that did bring us a meal have been loyal friends from that church that we were in small group with. So I'm thankful for that, for some people's loyalty. But but yeah. So that was just, I can relate in that way. So what has your experience been like with faith reconstruction? What does your faith look like today, and how has it changed?
Yeah, you know, I don't use the term reconstruction personally, and that's I'm not militant about that, but I think for some people in our community, we hear reconstruction from people who are like, hey, if you're going to deconstruct, no problem. Just make sure you reconstruct the right way. You know, it's like, no, don't think so. I would say for me, it's about, and I don't like using the term progression because that makes people think like, you know, like politically progressive. That's not what we're talking about here. But there is like a path, I guess you can say, that I'm still walking down, right? And there's still rooms that I'm exploring. And so for me, the process of deconstruction for some people, because deconstruction is an explosion, but in the context that we deal with it in, a lot of people come to us and they go, hey, I think I'm deconstructing, I'm panicking, I think I'm losing my faith. You know, what if hell is not real? What if the Bible isn't what I thought it was? And that's like the skyscraper of like their personhood just swaying, right? Because religion is so tied to that. That's a very valid stage to be in. The good news is that it really is a stage. And I went through that stage, and it is anxiety inducing, especially being a type 6, a self-doubter, right? You know that it's just like, it can really snowball. For now, though, where I am is almost kind of optimistically exploring. Like, because I'm not so focused on what is the objective truth about the Bible, because that's like really a fool's errand in that sense. Like the Bible is so complicated. People see it so differently. That has helped me go from like, okay, Tim, what is the objective truth to, well, what if I had more of like an explorer's hat? Like I'm trying to explore, what are some themes we're seeing in Scripture? How does this theologian trace this theme throughout the Christian tradition or throughout the Bible? How does James Cone, right, look at the cross and then write a book called The Cross and the Lynching Tree, comparing black bodies that were lynched as you know, the suffering servant, right, who suffered unjustly for the sins of the world. Wow, that's a powerful thread I never even thought about before. So that mentality shift from, hey, is James Cone objectively correct, to, whoa, this theme through his contextual lens is actually really impactful and like game-changing, that I should be repenting of my own complicity in these systems that have contributed to that. That's a very different focus, right? And so that's kind of where I am now, where it's like, it's much more exploratory. It's much more like, yeah, I never thought about it like that before. What can I learn from this? And also, how can I contribute to this conversation while not trying to have my new truth corner saying, hey guys, don't worry, new evangelicals have found the new truth. We found the new absolute standard. And these conservatives are just a bunch of morons. They just have it totally wrong. That mentality, I think, is what creates that otherness, as opposed to like, well, can we acknowledge that, like, maybe how a Calvinist gets to predestination, maybe you could trace some of that, but also maybe like there's other ways of viewing it that are more faithful to the overall theme of Jesus, of being inclusive and being, you know, loving and whatever. So that's the shift for me. And that's kind of where I am now, honestly, just like very much taking a seat back, or a back seat, and just kind of like looking at it and just observing, and just trying to explore the vast Christian tradition that I never knew existed till like 3 years ago.
Yeah, so you're exploring. Yeah. And I like to think of it as like openness and curiosity. And I don't know,
Yeah,
we grow up so black and white in evangelicalism,
totally.
and exploring that there's just so much vastness in this gray area in between.
Yes.
And can you follow different trains of thought and think through the implications, and can you explore the history and the traditions like you're saying, and just yeah, try to be more open to the different possibilities instead of it always has to be one way or the other, this black and white dichotomy.
Totally. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, and frankly, without getting into the weeds, all we have to do is look at church history to see that this idea that the Bible has objectively accurate truths, that it only says one thing. I just think it's such a fool's errand, even if that was the reality, because clearly no one in church history has found that, because they all disagree with each other. Eastern Orthodox think that they're the true church from the apostles. The Catholic Church thinks that. Protestants think that Catholics aren't real Christians. Conservatives think that progressives are heretics. Charismatics think that Baptists don't have the full Holy Spirit. Baptists thinks that charismatics are demonic. I mean, it's like, at what point do you just go, wait, and we're supposed to believe that, like, oh, you found the objective truth? Like, come on, that can't be the right framework to have here. And I found that, like, the exploratory curiosity, it's actually way more fun. It's way more. It's not as weighty of like, if I'm wrong, damnation awaits. It's more of like, wow, God, like, this is a really intricate system that we are dealing with here, and like, I want to be maybe humble, right, and assume that me in one blip on the timeline of world history suddenly has arrived at the true gospel, and no one else besides our tribe has really gotten the true gospel correct. I mean, that's just very arrogant. I think a very arrogant position to have.
Yeah. Yeah, but we see it a lot, and I'm sure you get a lot of criticism and pushback in your DMs, along with the people that you're helping too. How do you respond to a lot of the criticism or people wanting to argue theology with you and tell you there is one true way, there's one right way?
Audio messages.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I mean, that audio messages in DMs is the most disarming thing ever. And frankly, as a white male who has a name, the New Evangelicals, we don't get a lot of like real hate. There are accounts that are led by women who get literally death threats, and I think it just shows how misogynistic this culture can be. Or women of color who get racist death threats. So certainly, my privilege here helps kind of shield myself from some of this. But whenever people criticize or critique, I'm always open to critiquing. I mean, we can be wrong. Repentance is a gift to do better. And I'm not claiming to be objectively accurate in all things. I'm a human being. I have my biases. But usually I just engage in the DMs, a few audio messages, and I just present what we talked about here. Like, hey, I hear that you have a perspective. That's fine. But can you just acknowledge that it's a perspective? Because look at church history. I mean, for you to say that you are objectively true and the Catholics are not, I mean, get in line, my friend. Get in line. So that's how I usually engage. I don't get into comments super often, but we don't get a ton of like, my DMs are overwhelmingly either positive or, hey, can you help me? Hey, I have a question about this. Hey, what do I do with this? Hey, here's a resource I found. Maybe you should share it with people. It's way more of that than you're a heretic. You suck. We get a few of those, but whatever. Yeah, it's pretty minimal.
That's good to hear. Every once in a while I get something that I posted that really blows up, and that happened this week with a reel that I made about that my husband's not the head, and mutual submission, basically me arguing for mutual submission rather than just one-sided submission. So it was shared on a patriarchal account, and then got lots and lots of comments and lots of arguing and lots of show me in the Bible where this is, and throwing Bible verse after Bible verse after Bible verse. And I would say, like, I understand that's your interpretation. We have different interpretations. And then there's only one interpretation. There's no such thing as your interpretation. And I was thinking, like, well, we'd have no need for, like, seminaries or theologians or hermeneutics or any of that if there was only one interpretation. So
totally. I mean, that's exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly correct. And frankly, like, once you start engaging on that level, then you're arguing on their terms. Because what do? Then you pull out your Bible verse. And then, no, wait, we can't. I'm not arguing like this. I'm not going to pick out proof text to prove my point. That's how we got into slavery. That's how we get into segregation. I mean, that leads down some very dark paths. We have to look at themes and systems and interpret through different contexts. But yeah, I get those every now and then. I go, I mean, okay, they don't even, respectfully to them, they don't even hear themselves. I mean, it's like a fish saying that they're not wet. It's like, bro, you are wet. You're in the water. No, no, no. I am above the water. You are wet, but I am not. It's like, oh my God. Okay, bro. You know, like if that's your perspective, and you don't think it's a perspective, there's nowhere else to go with this other than I give them the thumbs up. But you got it. You can, fine. You know.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I just acknowledge that people have usually spent years invested in their position, and with conservatism or with fundamentalism, like your whole identity is really wrapped up in that. And especially, I don't know, for women in this issue, like their identity as a homemaker, as a mom, as a wife, as a homeschooler, as a submissive wife is very wrapped up in complementarianism and their beliefs. And so, and my belief has been formed over years of study and research and prayer and discernment and thinking. And, you know, I'm not going to be able to summarize in an Instagram comment. You know, I'm not going to be able to say this Bible verse answers it.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a great point.
I refused to like do that. And then I got accused of like, well, you're not willing to teach and you're a false teacher. So
Jesus. I mean, that's how it works though. Like there really is, there's no good faith dialogue in those conversations, because no matter what you say, no matter what resources you give, no matter what points you make, will always be refuted. And all roads lead to them. That's why I rarely engage in comments. I always DM through audio message, because you need to have a real dialogue, or else like, why am I here on my phone wasting time, right, trying to convince someone that is not interested in being convinced? And frankly, complementarian theology, I think, is absolute nonsense, and it ultimately leads to the subjugation of women. That's what it comes from, you know, and it's harmful, it's dangerous. There are very few people that I think identify as complementarians that I would say are like, I could really engage with them. Russell Moore, I think, would be one of them. I'm not even sure if he would identify as complementarian, but he holds more traditional views in that way. But he's like a very level-headed, you know, like not abusive person. But yeah, as far as the theology itself goes, I mean, in the trash it goes, in my view. Like, goodbye.
Yeah. But that's a good tip to engage in the audio messages, because also you hear their voice and that humanizes it. Because some of these people, I was thinking, like, if I met you out, you know, in a mom's play group or something, you're not going to say, you're just basing this on feelings and this is just your opinion and you're a false teacher. Like, you're not going to say that to me. So if we hear each other's voice, I think that's a good tip. So I'm going to take that.
I always use the voice. It's so disarming. Yes. My God, please don't. I mean, it's a judgment call, right? Of like, maybe this person's open to conversation versus like, you're just a troll. So,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, well, good approach. So any words of advice or encouragement you have for people going through faith deconstruction? Is there anything you wish you could go back and tell yourself a couple of years ago, or something that would have been helpful to you at the time?
I would definitely tell myself that the anxiety does get relieved over time, and that it takes work. Like, this is not easy work, okay? Let's just be honest, right? Like, rethinking core beliefs that were formed as a child or a young adult for you that are very cemented into your brain, that is painful work to jackhammer all that apart and see what's underneath, and then try and pour new cement, but not being too firm, right? So there's a lot of things that we're trying to do here. My advice would be to keep going, to do the work, and to honestly explore. And by the way, let me just say, for people out there, and maybe this might be provocative, but you don't have to stay in the Christian house. Like, there is a door. You know, you can walk outside that door. There are other houses on the block that you can go explore. And that's not for me to decide about how you want to find religious fulfillment or even fulfillment in life regarding your religious views. Certainly, I identify as a Jesus follower, and we stay in the Christian tradition. But people have come into our circles and they say, you know what? I think I'm taking the exit ramp. I think that maybe atheism is better for me, or I'm going to explore Buddhism. It's like, you know what? God, in my view, is big enough to handle that, and it's not my job to gatekeep you in your life. And if that helps promote your flourishing, I wish you the best, and we're always going to be here, and you're welcome to engage anytime. So I just want to say that, for some people out there who might feel like their only option is just to find a different room in the Christian tradition, certainly for us, that's how we view how we want to go forward as new evangelicals. But that might not be for everyone, and frankly, that's okay.
Yeah, and they're still welcome to follow you and take what they can.
All the time. Yeah.
I have some followers who are LDS, Christian, Mormon, and then some that are Muslim and different and Jewish, different faith traditions, but they can relate to the purity culture and patriarchy stuff because that's in their religious traditions.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So that's cool when we can find common ground and we can say like, come and still be a part of this and take what you can from it, but we're not going to be prescriptive about what it has to look like, what your faith has to look like.
Right. And certainly, I mean, the way I see it too is like, what can I learn? I mean, especially right now, I've been thinking a lot about Judaism. Like, why have I only learned Christianized versions of the Jewish Bible? Right? Like, how do Jews view the Torah and the Tanakh? Like, what are the themes that they see? And so I think that kind of perspective helps me just kind of fill out my own worldview. I might not come to the conclusion of, oh yes, I agree with all of this, or I might, if I'm talking to maybe someone who's Muslim, right, I might come away thinking like, yeah, that's some interesting perspectives. Maybe I don't see it eye to eye, but certainly there has to be some wisdom there that I can learn from and just kind of absorb, like, that's a thought-provoking perspective I never considered before. So I think there's also that as well, where as Jesus people, you know, we can also be willing to listen and learn from other faith traditions, even though for my upbringing that's so like, what are you thinking? That's so crazy. But the world is big, and certainly God is bigger than just Christianity. I hate to say it. I mean, you know, Christianity wasn't always around, and God will work throughout the world. So certainly we can have that humility to be open to that.
Yeah, that's helped with me being a psychologist. Like mindfulness meditation is a big part of my therapy practice, and that has Zen Buddhist roots. But to see like how beneficial it is psychologically and how it can be beneficial for Christians too. Like it doesn't have to be some weird Eastern thing. Like it can be something that, you know, with stress and everything. So yeah. So that's helped when I learned that in grad school to help me see like other faith traditions have merit too and have some value, even if we don't agree on some other parts.
Sure. Exactly.
Yeah. And I appreciate you saying how painful deconstruction can be and how difficult it can be, because there's so much judgment that comes from evangelical faith leaders about deconstruction, or from people's own communities or families when they're deconstructing. But it's actually quite painful and one of the hardest things that many people go through, of just questioning their beliefs, because it really shakes you at your core and can shake the foundation of your identity and your worldview.
Yes.
You mentioned therapy. That's been helpful to you. What are some other things that have been helpful for the pain of going through deconstruction?
I'm a big, I like nerding out on theology. So for me, the Bible Project podcast has been one of my most favorite podcasts ever. That just helped me really understand the Bible in very different categories and lenses than what I grew up being taught about the Bible. So that has helped me a lot with like my previous anxiety over like, just what I was taught about the Bible, frankly. I think a lot of this does come down to how we're taught about specific elements of the Christian tradition, specifically the Bible, and how it's just God's word written to us. And like, if you don't read it this way, you're not really a Christian. And those kinds of theologians, Pete Enns, another one, Trip Fuller, have really helped me just understand that inside the Christian tradition, actually fundamentalist evangelicalism is kind of fringe. Like maybe they're the oddballs a little bit, you know. And in the grand scheme of things, like there's a lot of other more beautiful ways to view the Bible, even the work of God and Jesus actively still happening in the world, that really changed my category. So that's another one. I would say for me personally, my partner, my wife, you know, she's been really supportive all the way through and just very much a rock. She does not get anxious like I do. So in my days of anxiety, she's very solid, which I really appreciate.
Yeah. What's her Enneagram?
2.
Oh, okay. Oh, so she's very nurturing. And,
she is.
And makes space for you. What's it been like with you guys being on some different pages with your faith and maybe with the deconstruction process? How's that been? How has that been? It's
funny because we're going to celebrate 6 years next week. And, you know, at our wedding, we had a foot washing ceremony. I mean, we did all the evangelicals. I know. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I got pictures. Okay. I mean, we did it all.
Did you give each other your True Love Waits rings?
I did not.
Okay.
We did not do that. So I guess I didn't hit all the evangelical metrics.
Okay.
But yeah, we did communion. It was very evangelical centric, I should say.
Yeah.
And you know, you're kind of taught that the most important thing is that you share the same level of faith. Yeah. So what happens, right, when a partner says, "I'm not sure where I land"? And Sarah was ahead of me on this. She was the one who was like, I think I'm affirming. You know, I don't think being gay is sinful. I'm like, I don't know, Sarah. Like, I'm not saying we shouldn't love them, you know, but like the Bible, like, so she was ahead of me in these ways. And at first there was an anxiety I had of like, oh my God, I've been taught that if we diverge on our spiritual paths, our marriage is going to disintegrate. But
You're
also,
unequally yoked.
exactly. But
Yeah.
then I just started trusting our relationship and realized that we have common values outside of how we view the Christian tradition. And now, after we communicate really well. We have very open dialogue, and we have time that we make to ask each other questions. One thing I would say that has helped us is that I learned to make room for my partner, and she learned to make room for me, and to kind of be our own people in our beliefs. And so, like, sometimes we get people who are like, hey, I'm deconstructing, but my partner's not, and he or she is really hostile to me deconstructing. What I say is, like, listen, marriage is a two-way street, and your partner has to make room for you as you make room for your partner, right? There has to be a thing where you feel safe in your marriage to be able to say, maybe we don't see things the same way, and your partner says, okay, maybe we don't, but I still affirm you and love you as a human being because I made a commitment to you to stick with you through thick and thin, right? Therefore, this needs, I have this view. That's easier said than done for some people, but for us, our marriage is really great. And being 6 years into it, we are really aligned on almost everything in our lives, even though we see some of this stuff very differently.
Yeah, that's awesome. Making room for each other and being aligned on your core values, even if you see some things differently. How has that affected your parenting? I know, like, we're both still fairly new into the parenting world, and so, like, I haven't had to face a whole lot of deep questions yet, but we're already thinking, like, how are we going to teach them about faith? Like, we want to do differently than what I got, like, but yet I still want them to learn about God. And for me, I still want church to be a part of our family. So how are you guys?
I mean, we are just like, well, we're not there yet, so thank God, right? I mean, two and 3 months. We're not really sure, to be honest. We're still talking about that. I'm not sure how we would introduce some of this stuff. Like you said, we don't want it to be harmful. We want it to be life-giving, etc. I'm more concerned about when my kids get older and my parents, who I love dearly but are still very much evangelical and fundamentalist, when they start saying, oh, can we take Tim to church? Oh, like, they gave Tim his first Bible. And when that happens, you have two options, right? You can be like, no, this is harmful. Or you can say, thank you so much for the gift. We really appreciate it. I know that this is your way of showing love, right? Yeah. And that's kind of the path that we chose. But I am concerned about when we have to have the conversation of, like, hey, if they sleep over, we don't want them going to church with you, because they're 6 years old now and can start hearing what's being said. That I'm not looking forward to that conversation, because they'll take that as, like, you don't want to raise them as to be a Christian, and therefore they're going to burn in hell forever. And it's very much that kind of thing. But as far as the God conversation, we're working on it, but thankfully we're just not there yet.
Yeah. I think there's people I'm following and wanting to learn from about that. And as my children get older, but we had a question the other day. Our daughter said, is God a girl or a boy? And we were like, he's neither. Or we were like, he's neither. Like, right. And it was just like, how do we explain this? And then how does a 3-year-old even get this? And how do I even get it? Like, it's, there's a lot to still figure out. So,
yes.
So I appreciate you're humble and still learning in that area. I am too. So.
I wish I had some guru answer, but I just don't.
Well, anything else you want to share with people about, like, ways that they can get help? Like, I know you guys run some Zoom groups, right? And are there other resources you want to offer people or things you recommend?
Yeah, so a couple things that you can think about. First off, when it comes to therapy, I really recommend the Reclamation Collective. They do really amazing work in religious trauma. I've talked to the founders. They're amazing human beings, well-respected in our circle. So there's that. As far as New Evangelicals, we do our best to hold space for people. We do Zoom groups. We do a book club that will be coming back. You can go to our website, thenewevangelicals.com, and kind of sign up for some of that stuff and see what's available. And we also do a map of people where you can sign up for free. There's no cost to what we do. You can see who's in your area. You can DM them for a cup of non-proselytizing coffee. And lastly, what I would say is that we do have a Facebook community as well that you can sign up for and be a part of. So we definitely have places to get involved. Nothing's perfect. I'm not going to tell you that you're going to find all your answers or not have some friction, because there's 5,000 people in a Facebook group. But we do our best to moderate that and just to hold space for people as they navigate.
Yeah, yeah. And there's lots of opportunities for people to connect and to use this as just one resource on their journey. Like it's not the
Totally.
be all end all or the answer, but yeah, one resource. And you mentioned podcasts and different that have been helpful to you and different things like that. So
And we have a resource highlight on our Instagram of all that stuff. So you can go through like all the books that we recommend, all the other accounts. I mean, we really try and get people not just to be in our circle, but to really expand and kind of get them different places. Because we can't be the answer to everything. We're not claiming to be the answer to everything, you know? So we have to network with people and be able to share best practices and people who have specialties and expertise in places that we just don't.
yeah, good. Well, thank you so much for talking to me, Tim, and thank you for sharing your story. It was good to hear more of your heart behind the new Evangelicals and like your mission and the house, the analogy of the house,
Yeah.
and yeah, some just good advice and encouragement for people on this journey.
Well, thanks for having me. It was honestly, it's great seeing you again. We
Yeah.
chat every now and then behind the scenes. I really enjoy it. So definitely keep in touch.
Yes, and I love whenever you post a video holding your baby. I commented one time and I'm like, look at you daddying like a boss, you know?
Like a
Like,
boss, you
there's no
know?
word for that. Like they say, you're momming like a boss. You gotta say you're daddying like a boss.
You know what's funny now? I realize that in some of my videos, I have like drool stains here or
Uh-huh.
here. And I'm like, oh my God, I have a dirty shirt on because my kid was just drooling or threw up on me 5 minutes before I started recording the video. But it is what it is, you know? Like
That's
what you
real
see is what
life.
you get. It's real
Yeah.
life.
And it's good to see it from a dad as you're
Yeah.
working and rocking the baby with the drool. So,
Thanks for having me. I
all
appreciate
right.
it.
Thank you. You take
All right.
care.
See you
Bye.
later.